Are live.
Enough.
Okay, we are live, and here comes the intro.
Tell me when, yes?
Okay, here we go. Good afternoon from Philadelphia. Frank here with another edition of UFO News Network Sunday on Easter Sunday. And boy, do we have a very special Easter basket for you. My co-host is always Chant Hannah. Chant, why don't you bring in and introduce our guest who really doesn't need any introduction, but go ahead and do it anyway.
Thank you, Frank. We have a very special show today with a legendary person. It is my distinct privilege and pleasure to welcome Uri Geller. Thank you, Uri, for being on our show today.
Hey, Chad and Frank, thank you very much for inviting me onto your show. You sound like two wonderful people, and I really hope that someday we will meet in Old Jaffa in Israel, where I'm speaking to you from. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much for your generosity and your time and effort to be on our show. I wanted to read a little bit about your background for our listeners, although you don't really need an introduction, but I just wanted to share a little bit about yourself with our listeners. And that is, Uri is a judge on Israel's Got Talent. His Uri Geller Museum is located in Old Jaffa, is currently being developed and will be finished soon. We will be talking to him about that. Uri Geller's fame in part comes from performances of spoon bending and other psychic feats. He has appeared in various television shows across the world that have astounded his viewers. In 1975, Geller published his first autobiography, My Story. Geller starred in the 2001 horror film Sanitarium. He appeared as a contestant on the first series of the British reality TV show, I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. Geller co-produced the Book of Knowledge, which was released in April 2008. He started his career as a nightclub entertainer for smaller audiences. He also did a show on Dutch television. Uri has been studied by the world's leading scientists, including a few who worked with Albert Einstein. Uri, I had a few questions for you from our listeners. Do you mind if I go ahead and start with that?
No, absolutely. But you know what? Before you start,
yes.
This is very interesting because I think that most of your listeners are open-minded and not skeptics. But because I'm so controversial, and I have been controversial for 50 years, those people who just think that I'm just a simple magician and everything is done with trickery, the tests that I've gone under through, the hands of incredibly famous scientists like Dr. Werner von Braun, like Captain Edgar Mitchell, who was the sixth man to walk on the moon, and the CIA, MI5, Mossad. Let me just read out one conclusion from the CIA, and this is from their manual. And this is what they concluded. As a result of Geller's success in this experimental period, we consider that he has demonstrated his paranormal perceptual ability in a convincing and unambiguous manner. And if some of you can't believe that the CIA concluded this, simply go to the CIA's official website. It's there. So let's put that behind our back, the skeptics, and let's talk about amazing things that happened to me and to you, the listeners.
Absolutely, I agree with you. And so our listeners understand where Uri is talking about. What you do is you would go ahead and look up CIA's website regarding their archives, their library that they have. So you would go to cia.gov/library. Then you would type in Uri's name, and you will see 10 to 11 pages which is absolutely astounding regarding the amount of data that they have of documents on Uri. Uri, thank you very much for being so kind as to let us know that information about yourself. I have a question from one of our listeners, Dave Beatty, who is an Emmy Award-winning creator of the Nimitz Encounters movie. He wants to know about apoports. Can you touch on that subject, please?
Well, this is a fascinating question because I'm going to a bit slide away or bend a little away from that exact topic, but I'm going to talk about a very unusual poltergeist effect that happened. And the reason I'm bringing this up because it's to do with this question. When the CIA tested me in Palo Alto, Langley, Virginia, the American Naval Surface Weapons Center in Baltimore, and where they build nuclear weapons, the Lawrence Livermore Radiation Labs in Livermore, something very odd happened. And MI5, the British Secret Service, wanted also to test me. So they flew me to the UK. It was under quite a elaborate camouflage where they invited me to do a TV show with a very famous presenter called David Dimbleby, who is still around. But parallel to that, secretly, they started testing my abilities. One of the experimenters was no other than Professor David Bohm, who was actually a friend of Albert Einstein. The David Bohm effect, very well known worldwide scientifically. And something very odd happened. A materialization happened, and they translated it to an apport or to a poltergeist. Now, when those documents got to the CIA, they also were handed to NSA, National Security Agency. That blew their minds. And NSA decided the following. They said, look, if Uri Geller can do this, he can move an object from point A to point B. What would happen if 10 Uri Gellers will be trained to do such a feat, to make something disappear? And I'm not kidding you, but they were planning on making a Russian city disappear. Now, if it's hard for you to swallow, if this is hard for you to believe, simply go to my website, go to the NSA documents, secret documents that were also released recently, and it's in there. It's actually mind-blowing. So I definitely believe that the power of the mind is capable to do psychokinetic feats. There's no doubt in my mind that 1,000 years from now, probably everybody will be able to master apportations, teleportations, dematerializations, and so forth.
Thank you, Uri, for covering that. The next question comes from UFO researcher and author Grant Cameron, working on his contact modality book. And he was tweeting, and I noticed a question he had, and he actually posted a link directly to your website regarding his question. And so I'll go ahead and read off his tweet and then mention your link to your website and then tell you why he did that. So this is the tweet that Grant Cameron had. Working on my contact modality book and the modality of apoports, which was big at Skinwalker Ranch. I think it is all related to the metal supposedly falling off flying saucers around the world. So I asked Hal about it. He meant Hal Putoff. And then he went ahead and included a link directly to your website, UriGeller.com, the Metal Benders Chapter 19, regarding teleportation. Do you have any comments on that, Uri?
Look, my website is so huge, and I urge you to go and visit it because most of my books are available to read free of charge, and it's loaded with scientific information, UFOs, you name it. It's all on my website. So I can't exactly put my finger on that page of the book. If I would only know what he's talking about,
right,
I would be able to elaborate on it.
Okay,
do you
sure.
know by any chance what he read and from which book is it taken?
Right. So what I think he might be referring to is he appears to be referring to metal supposedly falling off actual extraterrestrial craft around the world. And he is somehow combining your research regarding teleportation. And it is chapter 19. And the title of it says, Further Detail of Teleportation. And I think he just wanted to know if you feel like it's possible that parts that are falling off of extraterrestrial craft may have the possibility of having the topic of teleportation combined with that.
Yes. Okay, let me talk about my teleportation
Okay, that would be great.
experiences and encounters. But let me start with John Lennon. John Lennon was a very good friend. I lived on 57th Street and First Avenue in New York. He lived in the Dakota building. One day he wakes me up in the middle of the night and he says, Uri, come to me. I got to meet you. So I didn't feel like jogging all the way to Dakota building, which is on the other side of Central Park. I said to him, let's meet in a hotel in between. So we met there and he was kind of shaking. And then he tells me this most bizarre story. He says that he was lying down in his bed, half asleep. Suddenly, a sphere of light appeared in front of him by the foot of the bed. And he kind of jumped up and suddenly an extraterrestrial hand was stretched out towards him from this sphere of light. And he was compelled to stretch his hand and open his hand. And this extraterrestrial hand handed him something that looked like a bronze egg. And he pulls it out of his pocket in the hotel that we met. And he says, this is it. This was given to me tonight by this crazy thing. And he dropped it into my hand and I was shocked because it's a rather small egg that looks like it's made from bronze, but it's extremely heavy. And he said to me, I want you to keep it and carry it with you all the time. And very soon after that, he was murdered. And I have that egg with me all the time. I get hundreds, if not thousands of emails from people from all around the world asking me, Uri, why don't you have this egg tested and find out from what material it is? And my answer is very simple. I say, I don't want to test this because I don't want to be disappointed that it's made in Taiwan. I want to believe in John Lennon's words. And just recently, a few weeks ago, I managed to buy John Lennon's, the only UFO drawing he drew. It was auctioned in Los Angeles, and I managed to buy it. So that's going to be displayed in my museum, his UFO drawing, which is a pencil drawing, and the egg, and a few other items that I have from him. So whether that egg has anything to do with teleportation, maybe, because once a year, around December, if you shake the egg, it feels like there is something moving inside. That lasts for about 2 weeks, and then that feeling ebbs away, and the egg becomes solid again. I mean, if you Google Uri Geller, John Lennon egg, the stories will come up.
Fantastic.
Now, teleportation.
Yes.
Listen, what I'm about to tell you all is so bizarre, weird, fantastic, and it's like taken out of a science fiction movie, but it really happened to me. When I lived in New York, from 1972 to 83, one day I was jogging to a shop to buy a binocular for a doctor friend of ours. It was his birthday. I bought a binocular, and on the way back to my apartment, which was on 57th Street and First Avenue, I stopped by our very, very close friend, who is Byron Janis, who is a renowned American classical pianist, and his wife, Maria Janis Cooper, who happens to be Gary Cooper's daughter, the film actor. And I went up to their apartment, we chatted, and then I said, all right, I'm going home now. I was holding the binocular in my hand. It was all packed. I think I bought it in Bloomingdale's, if I'm not mistaken. As I was kind of walking fast on 57th Street, suddenly I looked down at the pavement and I'm no longer walking on the pavement. And the next thing I can remember, I was flying through the air, and in front of me there was a screen, a mesh, you know, those screens to keep flies away out from windows.
Yes.
And I stretched my hands to protect my face, and I crashed into a porch, onto a round table. The glass slid out from under my hands, and I fell on the floor. For the first seconds, I didn't realize where I was, but then the porch looked familiar, and I was in Ossining, New York, 36 miles out of Manhattan, in the house of Dr. Andrei Puharich, who was involved in bringing me out of Israel, who had ties and links to the CIA. There I was. I started screaming, Andrea, Andrea. It took him a few minutes to find me. And I told him I just left Maria's apartment. And he called Maria and he says, Maria, Uri is here. And she says, what do you mean? He just left our apartment. So this was one of the most shocking teleportation that I've ever experienced. I never had it before. I never had it after. And I know it happened. This is why I don't ebb away from this story. I wrote about it in all my books. I talk about it in documentaries. So, yeah, I mean, what was that? I don't know.
Uri, I'm really glad you covered that. And you also covered something very key and important that I'd wanted to talk about later with you. But I'm really glad that you're able to go into detail regarding the UFO art by John Lennon that everybody should take a look at, because we're showing that during the interview. And I wanted to move on to the next question regarding, and also want to mention to our listeners, by the way, that wonderful piece of UFO art that Uri did acquire was acquired for his fantastic museum, which we'll be going into later, that he has in Old Jaffa. The next question that Grant Cameron had is, have you had any brain scans or MRIs?
Look, I was tested so many times. Again, if you get on my website and click on what scientists say about Uri Geller, you will be shocked which high caliber, the scientists of the president, scientists from nuclear centers, scientists from hospitals, scientists from many different arenas of the scientific community. So I had brain scans, and my gosh, what didn't I have? But there is one amazing encounter that I did have, and I want to talk about it. When I was 5 years old, I was born in Israel. So we lived in a small street off Rothschild Boulevard called Bezalel Yafe, number 13. And across our small street was a huge Arabic garden. Now, today, there is a big bank on that plot. And I was playing inside the garden, and I heard kittens cry, and I was looking for them. And suddenly, like the John Lennon story, I saw in front of my eyes a huge, gigantic sphere of light. And I just stared at it, and maybe in 15 to 20 seconds, a beam shot out of it, a laser beam, like very solid and tangible, hit my forehead. It was so powerful that it pushed me into the grass. I don't know how long I lay there, but I ran home and told my mother. Of course, she didn't believe me. She thought that I was either making it up, or I dreamt it, or she just didn't believe. But it was real. I know it happened. Anyhow, I lived with this story for decades. I wrote about it everywhere. I spoke about it. And then a little miracle happened 10 years ago when a BBC documentary was playing in Israel. And I was talking about that encounter. I get a frantic email from a retired Air Force officer, Israeli Air Force, who says to me, Uri, I just saw this documentary and I heard you talking about the sphere of light and the laser beam. And let me tell you something. I was there. So I emailed him back to give me his phone. I called him and he says, I told him, what do you mean you were there? He said to me, I was a young soldier and I was walking on Rothschild Boulevard to my parents' home. And on the right, there was this huge garden and I saw a little boy with a white shirt, curly hair. And there appeared suddenly out of nowhere a huge sphere strobing. And the boy ran towards his apartment building. And this sphere of light followed him. And when the little boy, that was me, entered the entrance to this apartment, to my apartment building, which was only 4 floors high, that mass of light exploded on the building and left a kind of a darkish residue. And I told this guy, whose name is Avrahami, I told him, my goodness, you just validated something so important for me because nobody believed this story. And very soon after that, the first spoon bent in my hand when I was eating soup.
Also, it's important to note that Uri's mother believed that he developed these incredible powers from Sigmund Freud. Would that be correct that you count on him as an actual relative?
Oh, yeah. My name is actually my British passport. It's Uri Geller Freud. My mother was a Freud. And it was Clement Freud and Lucien Freud, the very famous painter. They're both dead artist.
Yes.
They convinced me to leave New York in 1983 and come and live in England. And I listened to them. And from 1983 to 3 years ago, we lived in England all these years. So yeah, that's true.
Fantastic. Now we have a question from UFO researcher Tony Bragalia. He wants to know about your attempts at bending the shape memory alloy nitinol psychokinetically at the Navy lab.
Yes, that was the experiments were headed by a scientist called Eldon Bird, and if I'm not mistaken, the inventor of nitinol was also there. I believe it was from a Chinese descent, and I might be wrong because we're talking about
No, you're right
70s.
about that. You're right about that.
Am I right?
Yep,
I remember. And there were another 3 scientists from 2 from CIA and 1 from NASA. And in front of them, I didn't know what nitinol was, of course, but they explained me, they showed me a wire, and they said to me that they're going to, let me just remember how it was. I think they bent it with their fingers, and they showed me that if they put it in hot water, it would spring back to the original shape. And they told me to, without touching it, it was, I believe it was under a bell jar, to concentrate on it and try to alter the molecular structure, which I did. It took me maybe 5 minutes. I didn't know what they were waiting for, what type of outcome they were waiting for. After 5 minutes, they took it out of the bell jar and they bent it and they put it in boiling water, and it didn't jump back to its original shape. So that's the story I remember to the best of my recollection.
Thank you, Uri. That's a wonderful story. And we have a question from UFO researcher Rodrigo Vieira. What do you think about the AATIP/TTSA program? That stands for Advanced Aviation Threat Identification Program, and To the Stars Academy. What do you think of that? Do you have any comment?
I really don't know about that, but what I can tell you is that, rather than rather than me talking about whether this research goes on, I'm so open-minded that I know that extraterrestrial life exists. I mean, from the movie, if there was no life out there, then what a waste of space. I mean, of course there is life out there. There's life in outer space, and there is life in inner space. if you hold a pen in your hand or a pencil, the tip of the pencil probably also holds universes and cosmoses in inner space, and there's no end. It's infinity, both outwards to the cosmos, there's no end, and there's no end to inner space. Now, there are so many endless civilizations out there, and of course, many of them are visiting us. Absolutely. I believe that extraterrestrials are walking among us. Listen, I was very close to Edgar Mitchell. Edgar Mitchell, the sixth man to walk on the moon, he told me things that blew my mind. My hair stands on end right now as I remember what he has told me. Incredible things. But hey, I mean, what's the big deal? Of course, we're not alone. So all these research groups that are trying to prove and say, and many of them are trying to debunk it. And I mean, sooner or later, a UFO will land openly and hopefully on the White House lawn, and we'll all see them. And all I can say is that I hope that a friendly civilization will land here. I believe that all the extraterrestrial contacts and UFO sightings and abductions, etc., that are happening for decades, if not for centuries, if not for thousands of years, because I believe the Bible, is loaded with extraterrestrial stories. I think that they're all friendly, because if they weren't, they could easily destroy us with a flick of a finger.
Okay, thank you very much. We have another question, and Grant actually just had a person communicate with me to ask you this question. Grant Cameron did. He wants to know, what do you think about Grant Cameron's proposed experiment to test if the DNA of trance channeler actually changes when the channeler is in a trance, as opposed to their normal DNA?
Look, that's a good question. I believe that if there is a genuine channeler that does bring information from an extraterrestrial source, maybe something does happen to the DNA, maybe to the chromosome system, maybe to the mind, maybe to the body, maybe to the soul. I'm not an expert in this. I'm not a prophet. I'm not a guru. I'm not a miracle worker. All I know is that I was born a believer, and I think that that's embedded into my DNA. But I'm also a religious man. I believe in God. I believe that there's a creator out there. And ever since I was a child, I'll never forget it, when I was 3 or 4 years old, my father would bring bullet heads back home from the army. He was a professional soldier. And I would fantasize that the bullet head is a rocket, and I'm sitting inside, and I'm flying through space, and the little garden under our house was another planet. So, my gosh, where did that information come from? So I'm a huge believer. No skeptic can dent my belief system. And I'm with you all, because your listeners, I think most of them are open-minded and believe. And I'm with you guys.
Wonderful. Uri, I believe Frank, my co-host, wants to go ahead and ask you a few questions. Thank you.
Yeah, we're obviously, we've got a hardcore following. A big chunk of our listenership is UFO researchers, and I know that they are fascinated by your direct work over here in the States with some UFO researchers. And you had mentioned him already, but I want to go into a little bit more detail about how this all came about, how he contacted you, and really helped take your fame to another level, and that is Andrea Puharich. How did he first contact you, and what did you think with this guy making this sort of contact with you? What was your reaction back then?
He was a maverick. He was a genius. He was an amazing person. Without him and without Edgar Mitchell, I wouldn't be Uri Geller today. Look, before I tell you, I urge you again to get on my website and go to books, click on free books, and read Andrea Puharich's book, which is available to read free on my website. It's called Uri by Andrea Puharich. I mean, the book freaks out people who don't know whether to believe in UFOs or not. It's such a fantastic book. And let me tell you a little secret. Do you know who pushed the book through to Doubleday? No other than the wife of President Kennedy, Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis. She loved the story. She loved the book. And she persuaded the head of Doubleday, I believe his name was Sargent, to publish the book. The book came out. It was translated into 30 or 40 languages. And it was so controversial. It's so mind-blowing, but I urge you to read it. Andrea came to me through the CIA. Apparently the CIA, what happened is this. I was working for the Mossad. And Mossad, which to those who don't know, is the Israeli Secret Service. They were aghast and at awe at the information I was bringing to them. But they didn't know how I did it. They didn't know the mind technology I was using. And one of the Mossad scientists say, look, send him to the CIA. Let the CIA test him. And you can actually see a CIA operative on my website. His name is Kit Green. If you go to my, I think the video is on second or third page on my homepage, where he tells a story how he got a phone call in Langley, Virginia, from an ally, which was Israel Mossad. And they said, we've got this guy who bends metal and does amazing telepathy. And that was the beginning. Now, before the CIA took me out of Israel, they sent Andrei Puharich to test me, just to make sure that I'm not a magician or I'm not fooling everyone. So Andrea came to Tel Aviv. He rented a small apartment in Herzliya, which is in the suburb of Tel Aviv, and he tested me under controlled conditions with his apparatus, and he was mind blown. I did all kinds of things, moved the hands of a watch, I moved compass needles, I materialized and dematerialized cartridges of pens, and he freaked out. He contacted the CIA and said to them, this guy's real. And I left Israel in 1972. First, I went to Germany. I was really scared to go to Palo Alto. But then I spent a few months in Germany, and then I went over to America. And it was Hal Puthoff and Russell Tugg who met me in San Francisco airport. And the rest is history. And just about over a year ago, the CIA released some of the documents. They were secret, about the telepathy experiments I've done. And you should watch the secret CIA movie that SRI released. It's
That's a great
also on
movie.
my website.
I highly recommend it. Absolutely. I rewatched it in preparation for this show. One thing that Puharich claimed about you is that, he made a claim regarding himself and that related to you was that, and obviously this is why the book is so controversial and might get people more interested in reading it over at your website, but he claimed that extraterrestrial beings had communicated to him that you were in fact the chosen savior of humanity and been given the ability to contact flying saucers and perform various paranormal phenomena. Now, at this point in time, you're a young guy, you're in your mid-20s, and this is coming out in the book. I mean, how comfortable are you with all this being claimed about you?
All right, it's a brilliant question. Yeah, you asked it also the right way, Frank. Look, if I have to reflect on Andrea's book today, I will tell you this. And read my lips, you can't, but imagine me. Every word in that book is true. Nothing in it was reported or exaggerated. But, here is the big but. The way he translated it and interpreted it was so mind-blowing to me at that age that I couldn't handle it. I couldn't absorb it. I couldn't take it in. It was too much for me. I had a big showdown with Puharich in Ossining, New York. I said to him, Andrea, you gotta, he was so obsessed with me. He was like my Svengali. He was my guru. He wanted to owe me everything. So he signed me on a contract, not for the money. He didn't care about money. He didn't want to lose me. And being so young at that time, not really having any financial backing, I came to America broke. I wanted the Johnny Carsons. I wanted to be on Merv Griffin. I wanted to be on Mike Douglas. I wanted the glory. I was after fame and fortune. I was on an ego trip. So I'll never forget the day the showdown came. It was in his Ossining house. It was, if I'm not mistaken, 47 Hawks Avenue in Ossining, New York. That's where Sing Sing is. And I lived there for a while with him. It was crazy. Grandfather clocks took off. Things were smashing against the walls. It was unbelievable. But I adhere to that theory. Now, I don't want to talk about me being the savior and all that because it's just not right. But I am doing certain things that I cannot talk about. There's a red line up to where I can talk. And hopefully someday it'll come out. So I hope that answers part of the question.
Yeah, most definitely. And then coming up later on, I mean, you've already dropped some of these names that I had lined up to ask you about. But there are some individuals who, we've got a UFO buff audience here. So a lot of these names, they're still active in this field in one form or another. Suddenly you're working with Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ, and they've got scientific experiments. In the movie that you had mentioned, The Secret Life of Uri Geller, you had talked about already working operationally for the Mossad. But what these guys want to do is they want to test you more scientifically. And what were your initial impressions of Puthoff and Targ when you were first introduced to these fellows, and Kit Green as well?
Well, they're, Russell Targ and Hal Puthoff, I never knew about them. I knew about Edgar Mitchell because he sent me a signed picture of him walking on the moon to Israel, and I couldn't believe it. I opened the envelope, and there we was, and he says to Uri Geller, my best wishes, Edgar Mitchell. I freaked out that I'm getting a picture from an astronaut who walked on the moon. Let me tell you something. I'm sorry I'm jumping off to Goddard Space Laboratory, but Werner von Braun, remember, Werner von Braun was a Nazi. Yeah, he started in Germany. He was Hitler's scientist. He created the V1 and the V2 that killed people in England. But he was so clever that the Americans brought him over to America. So there he is, taking his wedding ring off, and he says, "You're not going to touch my wedding ring, but if you bend it in my palm, in his palm, I will believe in your powers." And of course, I put my hand over his hand, his wedding ring totally bent out of shape. He couldn't put it on his finger. Then happens an amazing, amazing event. And this is the first time I'm talking about it. I've never really said this before. He took me to a back room. Again, if I'm not mistaken, it was Goddard Space Laboratory in NASA, or it could have been another laboratory. Again, it's hard for me to remember because I was tested in so many different places. He sits me down at a table, and he puts on the table a black attaché case, and he opens it. And in it was a piece of metal. To me, it looked like metal. It was curly at one end. And he said to me, "Put your hands on it and tell me where you think this comes from." So I placed my hand. He allowed me to touch it. It felt very, very cold, almost like he took it out of a freezer. And I said, "This is a part of a UFO." And he said, "Thank you, Uri Geller." And he shut the attaché case. I can still hear the two, knobs clicking. And he walked out of the room. This is amazing. I never spoke about this. now, what was your original question? How I felt about Hal Puthoff and Russell
Yeah,
Tarr?
I mean, here you are. I mean, you're in your mid-20s. You're a young guy, and all this, all of a sudden now you're going to be. Yeah, I mean, from seeing the movie, I mean, you've already had some extraordinary life experiences. Already a wounded combat veteran, already working for the Mossad. But here you are in a land far from home, basically being studied by these two fellas. I mean, they had to
I
have gained your trust, you know. I mean, they must have made some kind of positive impression on you for you to decide to work with them in the first place.
Look, they were just very nice. They were smiling and welcome and all that. But I feared the experiments. I was really concerned of failure. I knew that I can perform on stage. I knew that I could perform for under Puharich because it was easygoing. It was a rented apartment. But when I realized that I'm being filmed and watched in bell jars and Faraday cages, I was worried. I didn't want to fail. I wanted to succeed. And then, lo and behold, every time I did something, it worked. So they gave me a very nice feeling. They're brilliant people. Hal Puthoff and Russell Tarr, God bless them. They're amazing. Do you know why they're amazing? Because they stuck their necks out. To be a scientist today, if you go a bit UFO stuff, your grants could be stopped. You'll be ridiculed by colleagues, etc., etc. You know that, Jack.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But they went out on everything. They said everything, and they adhere to it until to this day. And I wouldn't be surprised. This is my opinion. I wouldn't be surprised if they're still not attached somehow, or maybe subliminally, to some kind of secret agency, government agency. Maybe I'm wrong, of course, but I'm allowed to voice my opinion.
Yep. Well, of course, Dr. Puthoff is involved in the To the Stars Academy. He's on the board there. He's still very active in all this, and that's why, I want to get those kind of questions in, because that's what our fans want to hear. They love this stuff. So, and also another gentleman who was featured in the Secret Life of Uri Geller movie was Kit Green. Of course, he's still actively involved, studying contactees and doing brain scans and so on. I think that's what might have prompted Grant Cameron's question about that. And he was involved in all this. And what can you tell him about working with him?
Look, the only time I worked with him was, and watch that clip please on my website, is when he held a book in Langley, Virginia. Yes. And I was in Palo Alto. Now remember, we're talking about the 70s. There were no iPhones. There were no FaceTime. There was no Twitter. There was no Instagram. There was no internet. There was an old-fashioned black phone. And to the White House, there was a red phone, which I used a few times. And he said to me, what can you tell me? They say you can see from afar. I said, he says, what am I holding in my hand? And I said, a book. And he says, I'm looking at a picture in the book. What is it? So I started drawing, and I threw most of the drawings into the trash can. But then I said, I feel that it's something like scrambled eggs. But what's coming in very strong is the word architectural. And I wrote architectural on that page. Now, he got the drawing later and he freaked out because he looked, the drawing was a picture of the brain, a cut of the brain from some kind of an anatomical book that he was preparing for a lecture. And he, with his own handwriting, has written on that page the word architectural. So, I mean, that's, basically telepathy, call it whatever, remote viewing. And that, I believe, impressed him tremendously.
Yeah, and I thought that was very interesting rewatching it. I'd sort of forgotten that segment because I first saw the movie a number of years ago and then rewatched it preparing for this. And talking about sort of the nuts and bolts of psychic abilities, that is a very interesting and fairly common result where you kind of get the general form of something, but don't get the exact. You don't get the object exactly, but you'll get the general form of it. You know, scrambled eggs looking a bit like the human brain.
Yeah, but no, I have to correct you, Jack.
Okay.
Because in most, sorry, Frank, in most of the cases, I got the drawing precisely. There was one drawing by the CIA of a bunch of grapes, and I got the same size bunch of grapes in Palo Alto, even to the number. I think it was 24 grapes. Most of my drawings were precise. Some were religious drawings, like they drew the devil with a trident. I couldn't get the devil. I got the trident, but and then I got the 10 Commandments coming up behind Earth. So that was very interesting. I don't know how that translated into my mind as maybe a religion, a religious iconic figure that is negative. So amazing. But in most cases, when I do telepathy, not only do I get the same drawing, but I also get the same size to the millimeter. You know, Chant and Frank, I must tell you that when you say that this program that you're doing is kind of a target audience, no, it's not. It's actually for everyone. Because I don't know if you realize, but almost 76% of all Americans, you know, the believers are the majority. Paranormal acceptance in America has been rising and rising and rising. I mean, people believe in lost civilizations. They believe in alien encounters, past and present. They believe in telekinesis. They believe in fortune telling. They believe in Bigfoot, and they believe in haunting spirits. 76% of Americans believe in at least one paranormal phenomenon. This is amazing. And if you go to the East, you go to the Far East, to Japan, to Taiwan, to China. I mean, this is accepted. No big deal. UFOs exist. Psychokinesis exists because it has been there for centuries.
People experience it in one way or another. I think that's what puts them over. You have some kind of an experience, whatever it is. The proof is in the pudding, and if you experience it yourself, well, that's what puts it over, I think, with those people. They've had some kind of paranormal experience during the course of their lives, and I think that accounts a little bit for, you know, the UFO audience sometimes skews a little bit more mature than, let's say, the pop music audience. And the longer you live, the more likely you are to have something like that happen to you.
Look, there are millions and millions and millions of people saw UFOs zooming in tremendous speeds that no airplane can fly, no rocket flies in that speed, zooming through our skies. There are enough UFO photographs, you know, thousands probably. There are enough stories of abductees, of people being abducted, of UFOs landing, of pilots, credible pilots flying airplanes who has seen them.
And radar.
And radar.
Physical evidence.
Credible information is available, and there's no doubt, I believe, that there are extraterrestrials walking among us.
Now, there was another incident that was gone over in the movie a little bit. You seemed a little hesitant, at least at the time that the movie was produced, to talk about it in much detail. But this regarded the raid on Entebbe, the rescue of an Israeli plane with hostages taken and held in Uganda. And obviously a successful military raid got those hostages out of there. And I don't know, can you go into a little bit more detail now that it's been a few years since the movie was released and talk about your involvement in that? Some people have claimed that you were involved in shutting down the radar, which allowed the commandos to get access to the plane, to the hostages, and get them out of there A-OK.
Yeah, I'm sorry to disappoint you,
okay.
Frank, but I can't comment on that. The part in that film, The Secret Life of Uri Geller, comes from, I believe, Eldon Bird, or the producer who is Vikram Jayanti, who is an Oscar-winning producer. He won an Oscar for a Muhammad Ali documentary. I cannot comment on Israeli stuff.
Okay.
Never have. All I can say, I work for the Mossad, and that's where I draw the line.
Okay, but those claims about you are out there. So
The
okay,
claims are
okay.
out there, but it's not coming from me.
Understood. Understood. Not a problem. Not a problem.
You know
And
that what's interesting is that part of the CIA released documents talk about the experiments, but then I worked also for CIA, and they sent me on many missions, and it's interesting how they even used me. It was the idea brainchild of Senator Claiborne Pell, who was then the head of the American Foreign Relations Committee. He believed that I could convince the Russians to sign the nuclear arms reduction treaty. So what he did, he sent over to London to brief me Ambassador Max Kempelman, who is a huge figure in Washington. I believe he also got the President's Star. And Max Kempelman briefed me. And then they flew me to Geneva. Al Gore was there beside me. And I got very close to Yuri Vorontsov, who was the head of the Russian nuclear arms reduction negotiator. And I bombarded his mind. Sign, sign, sign. And they signed. So I have influenced a lot of people throughout my life in a positive way. I don't do negative stuff. I was asked to do very bad things, but I always refused.
got it. And one fella who you had mentioned earlier, a real American hero, and he's been an influence on me. And from what you said is, he's been an influence on you. Sixth man to walk on the moon, Edgar Mitchell. If it wasn't for him, you might not be here talking to us. If it wasn't for him, I probably wouldn't be doing this show. So can you tell us a little bit about your personal impressions of Edgar Mitchell, a real American hero?
Well, he's, like you say, an American hero. What a beautiful soul he was. And he is, because I believe in life after death. That's another whole area that there's no doubt that, we don't die. I mean, our spirit, our soul survives. We go to another place, to another dimension. And what's amazing is that so many people kind of have difficulty in believing in life after death. And I tell them, look, Albert Einstein proved it. He proved it with the very simple equation, E equals mc squared. In 1924, Albert Einstein came out with this incredibly amazing equation, where he proved with that equation scientifically that everything in the universe is made from energy. You're energy, I'm energy, the phone I'm holding in my hand is energy. Tables are energy. They might feel solid, but they're basically energy. They're vibrating in a certain frequency that to us, they feel solid, but it's energy. And then he further proved that energy cannot be destroyed. So you have to ask the question, if energy cannot be destroyed, then what happens when we die? What happens to our energy? So that's my afterlife explanation, and Edgar Mitchell believed in it too. This is why I believe he's now in another dimension with all the other, icons of the world and the universe. And so he was a beautiful person, very, very, very highly intellectual, genius. He taught me so many things. And he was a pleasant man. And we had a teleportation with him at Stanford Research Institute, where we're walking in the corridor, and suddenly we heard something hitting the wall, and on the red carpet rolled a piece of metal. And Ed picked it up, didn't know what it was, put it in his pocket, and then we were having ice cream in the cafeteria, and I put a mouthful of vanilla ice cream into my mouth, a spoonful, and suddenly I feel that there's a metallic object in the ice cream. So I spit it out, and I'm kind of surprised that, what is metal doing inside my ice cream? And I look at Ed, and Ed's face ashens. He picks up the piece of metal, he pulls out from the pocket, his pocket, the other piece that came rolling and hitting the wall in the corridor, and he puts it together and he says, my God, this is my tie pin. I received it from NASA as a gift, and I received it 5 years ago, and I lost it on a beach in Florida.
Now that would be the very definition of an apport. Something like that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
As well as the John Lennon piece that he gave you.
Absolutely. So, we're talking about such amazing things. I can't remember everything now, but we have spoken about this so many times, and Ed kept that type in his safe in his home in Florida. Do you know that now you understand why I'm so controversial. I remember when I was doing Johnny Carson, I was told that if I do Johnny Carson, everybody will believe in Uri Geller. It's a huge show in America. And he was so skeptical. He was scoffing and sneering, and I bent a spoon in Ricardo Montalban's hand. It wasn't good enough for him. And I thought that this show will destroy me forever. And when I finished the show, I went back to the hotel in Los Angeles. I fell on the bed, devastated. And I said, the next morning, I'm going to pack up and fly back to Israel, because I thought, this is it. Johnny Carson destroyed me. The next morning, I get a phone call from the operator, and she says to me, Mr. Geller, I have a Merv Griffin on the line for you. So I said, you mean the Merv Griffin? She says, yeah, he says that's him. And I pick up the phone. She clicks his voice on, and he says to me, Uri Geller, I saw you last night on Johnny Carson. I want you on my show this week. And that's when I realized that all publicity is good publicity, as long as they spell my name correctly. And I have to go back to Oscar Wilde 100 years ago. Oscar Wilde said, there's only one worse thing in life than being talked about, and that's not being talked about. So, to you guys listening, we are believers, but there are a few skeptics out there. But the non-believers, to me, are a tiny, molecular, insignificant minority.
And let me turn things back to Chant. I know she's got some more questions for you.
I do. Thank you very much, Frank. That was absolutely fascinating. And Uri, I had a question for you regarding the cloning of John Lennon. You were featured in a few publications regarding your having bought a lock of John Lennon's hair, from which, if it is legal and ethical, you planned allegedly to ask Israeli scientists to clone the beetle. Is this true? And do you plan on doing that?
It's so not ethical, in my opinion. I just came up with this idea. It was a crazy idea, because I do have his hair now. I doubt that I will do something of this nature. Are you with me, by the way?
Oh, yes, we're listening to you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I doubt that I will do something of this nature, but you never know. Time goes by. You never know what science can bring about, and so forth. So I answered the question.
Yes, and I'm sorry. Actually, I interjected while you were talking because you broke up for a moment and I didn't hear you. But thank you for actually attending to that question. The other question I had for you is, and I have a few, but I'll be very fast. Are you in communication with extraterrestrials, or do you feel you ever have been?
No doubt that I have been, but through very strange means and ways. And I'm a believer, and I'd rather not talk about my connection to extraterrestrials, because there's a reason that I cannot talk about it. Okay. There's a solid reason.
Understood. The other question I wanted to ask you about is that wonderful piece of UFO art by John Lennon. What is your interpretation of it?
My feeling is that he actually really got it from an extraterrestrial source. There's no doubt in my mind. But again, there is that tiny percent, maybe 99.999, I believe, but there's always that little doubt in me that maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he pulled something on me. I even asked him, I remember this, were you on something? He says, no, it really happened.
I see. Thank you for answering that. And then I did also want to ask you about UFOs and consciousness, which is a huge topic in the UFO community. It's a rather broad topic, but I wanted to ask you if you feel like commenting in any perspective with regards to UFOs and consciousness, meaning extraterrestrial craft and consciousness. I'll give you an example. Stanton Friedman had studied the Betty and Barney Hill case exclusively, and through his investigation, he found out that Barney Hill had felt he had been telepathically in communication with aliens that had landed, and that's an iconic case everybody is pretty aware of. I wanted to know, do you feel like consciousness and extraterrestrials between humans exists, and if so, can you give us a little bit of input on that?
Yeah, I definitely believe in this because, look, if we have to explain or decipher what consciousness is, basically consciousness is the state or quality of awareness or of being aware of an external object or something within oneself. And it has been defined as sentience, awareness, it's the ability to experience or to feel wakefulness, having a sense of selfhood and the executive control of the mind. And there's no doubt that extraterrestrial energy, extraterrestrial contact, extraterrestrial telepathy can penetrate our consciousness, if that answers the question.
It does. I also wanted to ask you...
I want to follow up on this a little bit.
Sure.
Going back to Dr. Puharich, let's see, got to go through my notes here. But at one point, he talked about both he and you communicating with super intelligent computers. What do you think technology might hold for us in terms of psychic ability? Do you think there's some enhancement? I know going back earlier, a good decade before he met you, he was very much involved in studying psychedelic mushrooms. I know you don't recommend drug use as part of enhancing the ability. What about technology and the future that might hold for psychic ability?
I would like to go into something much bigger than psychic ability. If you look at the state our planet is in, you understand and you know that besides wars that are raging in the name of religion, beside the diseases that are still raging, I mean, every 3 seconds, this is catastrophic, but every 3 seconds, a baby dies from hunger somewhere around the world. And this is today. Then we have the catastrophic occurrences of global warming. The oceans are getting higher. The ice caps are melting, the weather is getting hotter, the possibility of a meteorite hitting our planet Earth and spinning it out of control. The things I just mentioned are real. It's real. It could happen. So if we don't find ways of controlling the pollution that we're emitting, we're going to dry up. In all these science fiction films that you see about the end of Earth and gigantic tsunamis drowning coastal cities, that's going to happen. Unless something extraterrestrial saves us. It's that simple. I don't see in 100 years or 200 years or even 300 years that we will be able to stop these existing catastrophes. What's going to happen is when mankind, civilization will realize that we can't stop it, we're going to start traveling and seed other planets. We'll take off with spacecrafts, rockets, whatever, and find other planets to live on. Like in the movies, there are so many movies about this subject.
Which actually segues, yes, go ahead, Uri, please.
No, so that's my main concern about our beautiful planet.
Thank you for that. That segues into a question I had for you about metamaterials, exotic alloy materials, which also may involve cloaking with regards to extraterrestrial crafts having the ability to do that. But moving along, governments, whether they be first world governments or just governments around the world, being able to get within their grasp metamaterials from extraterrestrial technology, reverse engineering it. How do you feel about that possibility that there might be governments around the world that have had within their position, both now and in the past, over a period of decades, been able to attain metamaterials from extraterrestrial crafts or find exotic alloys that have strange, extraordinary powers to them? Do you have any input on that?
Well, I definitely believe that what Dr. Werner von Braun showed me and allowed me to touch was an extraterrestrial alloy. It was really, honestly, super cold. And I don't know what happened to it, why he wanted to know this, what they did with this. Maybe I do know, but I can't talk about it. So yes, it is a possibility. There is that opening that they use this type of material to develop something that will allow us to travel through space and time.
Okay. And then we just have 2 questions left from our listeners, Uri. One question is from Roxy, and she wants to know, why was the island you bought in 2009, which was called the Lamb, important to you?
Oh, gosh, it was very important. Why? First of all, the reason I bought the island is because it's mysterious and it's enigmatic. The island has it's a magnetic center point for UFOs. I knew that immediately when I read about the island and when I saw the island. Also, the island claimed to be one of the, it's basically a volcanic outcrop, and there is some type of an energy that emanates out of this island. I call it ley lines, and the ley lines reach Roslin Chapel, and from Roslin Chapel, they go straight to the pyramids in Egypt. And this is very interesting because the connection has been known for centuries. You can read about it in 15th century manuscript called the Scoticron by an abbot, a Scottish abbot. His name was Walter Bauer. So when I heard that Lamb Island was for sale, I felt a very strong instinctive urge to buy it. And the more I delved into the history and the archaeological lore which surrounds it, the more certain I became that this is one of the most significant sites in Britain. I mean, this is amazing. This island has links not only to the pyramids, but to King Arthur, King Robert, the Bruce, to the ancient kings of Ireland. Incredible. And the connections to myth can only be understood by tracing ley lines. And those, we all know what ley lines, the mysterious invisible paths,
Yes.
which dowsers claim to be able to sense a flowing, what do you call it, lines of energy. To many dowsers, ley lines are as real as streams of underground water. And when I was told that people actually see UFOs over Lamb Island, I wasn't surprised. So it's a beacon. It's a magnetic, cosmic, some kind of an energy point on our planet.
Thank you for answering that. By the way, just wanted to mention Roxy, our listener, just like many of our listeners are very well educated in the area you're speaking of. She did mention, because I actually didn't read her entire question, part of it was it because of the correlation to the Knights Templar? As you said, the island lies in a triangle formed by 3 sites associated with the
Yes.
Knights Templar, or was it because of the form it makes with the 2 other islands, Phaedra and Craigslith, which resembles the layout of the Giza Pyramid? So I think that you answered that nicely. Thank you. And then the other question I have is from Brian Jackson. He wants to know currently, what is your perspective about how the CIA remote viewing program has evolved? Do you believe intelligence groups are pursuing even more esoteric psychic initiatives? It sounds like that's 2 different questions. I'll go ahead and let you know the first one. As of today, Uri, what is your perspective about how the CIA remote viewing program has evolved?
Every intelligence service in the world, I'm talking about the major ones, America, Russia, China, Spain, Germany, Italy, Britain, they all engage remote viewers because remote viewers can bring in incredibly valid information that, although our satellites are immensely technologically evolved and they can see through clouds today, what you couldn't see in the 70s, there's still information that secret services cannot put their hands on. Therefore, they use intuitives. They use remote viewers. Psychic espionage goes on all the time. And it's cheap. You don't have to spend hundreds of millions of dollars. All you have to do is to take a group of psychics, intuitives, sit them by computers in a darkened room, and they send their mind through space and time and bring back information. So the answer is yes. It is still going on.
Okay, and I just have 2 questions left, Uri, and that's it. And that is, do you believe intelligence groups are pursuing even more esoteric psychic initiatives? By Brian Jackson.
I'll repeat the question again.
Sure. Do you believe intelligence groups are pursuing even more esoteric psychic initiatives? I believe he means the intelligence community is what he's talking about. So I'll go ahead and rephrase it. Do you believe intelligence groups in the intelligence community are pursuing even more esoteric psychic initiatives?
Of course, but it's all gone deep black. No publicity. You won't find it in the Washington Post or in the New York Times. It's top secret what they're doing. And they have to, because the enemy is doing it. Do you understand?
Yes.
You've got to do it. Got to go along with it. I mean, it's incredible what I know. What's very interesting also is that in my museum, which will open in 7 months' time, I'm actually building now the largest spoon in the world. It's going to weigh 10 tons, and the length of it will be 18 meters. And hopefully I'll be able to place it 2 or 3 weeks from now, just before Eurovision comes to Israel. I was dowsing inside my museum, and you can see the museum on my website. And I felt that there's something under the ground. I got permission from the Israeli antiquity authorities to clear the earth. And lo and behold, we found a 800-year-old soap factory, because at that time the Muslims did not buy soap from Europe because it was made from pig oil. So this is the first olive oil soap factory in old Jaffa. And some of the archaeologists said to me, wow, if you if you found this, what else can you find for us? And one of them came up to me and said, can you find the Ark of the Covenant? Now, I mean, the Ark of the Covenant, ever since the Babylonian captivity of Jerusalem in the 6th century BCE, the whereabouts of the Ark of the Covenant has been a mystery. It has been described in the Old Testament of the Bible, the Ark served as a visible sign of God's presence to the Israelites. So it's amazing. According to the Bible, the Ark was last known to have rested, I think, in the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem. Whether it was destroyed, stolen, moved, or remained hidden after the Babylonian forces conquered the city and leveled the temple in, I think it was 587 BCE, is not known. But in another mystery concerning the Ark is its content. The Ark is said to contain numerous sacred relics, including the tables of the law from God that Moses brought back from Mount Sinai. This is unbelievable. Now, here is the other twist. The Ark possessed a supernatural power that awed and overwhelmed those who viewed it. And it served also as means through which God could express his will. Now, this is so amazing, so fantastic, that a lot of people tell me that maybe that itself was an extraterrestrial energy involved with the Ark of the Covenant. And I'm about to go out and look for it. I'm going to set out probably this summer or maybe next year, and I think I know where it is.
What's extraordinary is I was actually going to ask you about that. The Ark, and you just covered it. Uri, I wanted to go over your museum, but you brought it up, and I'm really glad that you did, because it's very important for people to understand that you've worked very hard on this museum, and that you're 7 months away from being able to finish it, and it has an extraordinary collection of eclectic items in it. Do you mind naming a few of the items that you plan on having in your museum?
Oh, yeah. The reason I'm calling it the Uri Geller Museum is because I'm going to display gifts that I got from quite extraordinary people. Like, I worked with Salvador Dali. He gave me sculptures, Andy Warhol, a painting, David Bowie, Picasso. There will be sculptures that are very unusual by British artists. I've got the pipe that belonged to Albert Einstein and an amazing letter that he has written to David Bohm. And the reason I got the letter is because I knew David Bohm. He studied me. I've got Sigmund Freud's pipe. I've got Sadat's pipe. There will be, and my Cadillac. My Cadillac, actually, a 1976 Fleetwood Brougham. It's so unusual that it stood in the Museum of Israel for a year. And from there, it went to the Visionary Museum of Art in Baltimore. And from there to many other museums, because I covered it with 2,000 bent spoons. Most of the spoons belong to famous people like the Pope, like Mick Jagger, like Kennedy, Muhammad Ali, Michael Jackson. I mean, I can go on, Elvis Presley. And the most extraordinary item is the mascot of the Cadillac. And here is the story, and with this we'll end the interview. In the early 70s, Salvador Dali freaked out for my powers. You know, he already in the 30s, he painted a bent spoon. So suddenly comes this young guy from Israel, bends a spoon for him, and he blows his mind because, you can only bend spoons on canvas, surrealistically. So he brings out from his bedroom a beautiful rock crystal sphere. Rock crystal is gorgeous. And he hands it to me and he says, I want you to have this as a gift. This belonged to Leonardo da Vinci. So I smiled. I didn't believe him. And I looked at my brother-in-law. He also smiled. We thought it was a joke. But I took it because it's so beautiful and heavy. So I carried it into my homes. I put it here and I put it there. And in the end, I decided to put it on 3 bent forks, which would lock the tongs of the forks would hold the sphere onto the Cadillac. And that was a mascot of the Cadillac. Now listen to this. Just before I made a comeback to Israel 3 years ago, I opened the Times in London and I read an interesting story about a Leonardo da Vinci painting that was found in an attic of a house of Jesus Christ. And lo and behold, what is Jesus Christ holding in his hand? My rock crystal. And that's when I realized that Dali wasn't joking. I don't know how Dali got the crystal, but because he was who he was, somebody probably, I don't know, from the Da Vinci family gave it to him. And he gave it to me. And the reason I know it's the same crystal is because I screamed to my wife, Hannah, we got to measure it. We got to look. And it's identical. The painting is called Salvatore Mundi. You can Google it. And the painting was sold just recently for, are you sitting down?
I am.
It was sold for $450 million to the Louvre in Abu Dhabi. Amazing. And I have that crystal. So the museum will have such eclectic and interesting collection of gifts that I received from very unusual people. So listen, Frank, I would like to end the interview by saying the following. This is important. A few things, and you can keep me on until I finish what I want to say now. Albert Einstein said, I know it by heart. This is Albert Einstein. The most beautiful thing we can experience is the mysterious. It is the source of all true art and science. He to whom this emotion is a stranger, who can no longer pause to wonder and stand wrapped in awe, is as good as dead. His eyes are closed. And Albert said the only real valuable thing is intuition. And when I get hundreds of emails a week, I get about 300 a day. And many come from young people who say to me, oh, Mr. Geller, please teach us how to bend the spoon. Because, spoon bending became iconic. George Clooney played me, Robert De Niro played me, Woody Allen mentions me in his movies. I know I'm sounding like I'm boasting now or showing off. Big rock bands sing about me and so on. So when kids ask me to teach them how to bend a spoon, my answer is the following. I say to them, forget spoon bending. Instead, focus on school, believe in yourself, start thinking positive, become a positive thinker, create a target goal to go to university, never ever smoke, never ever touch drugs, always think of success. Because if you can go there with your mind, you can go there with your body. Because whatever you can visualize, you can materialize. And there's nothing that you cannot be, do, or have, because we are the architects of our own lives. So whatever you deduced out of this interview, at least I left you with a very positive message. And Chant and Frank, God bless you. A big hug to you. and a huge, huge positive energy emanating from all Jaffa, from my heart, from my mind, from my soul to all your listeners, wherever you are, whether you're in America or worldwide. If you come to Israel, make sure you email me. My email address is on my website, and I might take you through the museum. All right?
Uri, thank you so very
thank you.
much. And happy Easter to you. Like I said, this was a fantastic Easter basket for all the listeners.
And I would like to tell the listeners to please go to urigeller.com. Uri, I did want to ask you, will you please come back onto our show again?
Sure, you sound like two beautiful people, and we will do that. And anyone who wants to email me, my email address is on my website. Again, I usually try to answer, but it's very difficult to answer, 200-300 emails a day. But that's what I get from around the world. So God bless, lots of love, and tons of positive energy. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you so very much. And there we have it, Chant Hannah. That was a fantastic show, I think.
Yes, it was absolutely fabulous. You and I were talking before the show about how this would be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and we will always remember this for the rest of our lives. And I have to concur with you on that, Frank. I'm really touched by this interview, and I really feel like all of our listeners have been gifted with having the privilege and opportunity to listen to a great man.
Yep, no doubt about it. And I do want to get in a little plug for our old friend Danny Silva from silverrecord.com. We had his question on the list talking about the orb experience, and Uri got to it before we had the chance to ask the question. So he covered it in some detail. There was no point in asking, but I did want to give a shout out to Danny. And so happy Easter to everyone. Was not expecting to work on a holiday, but here we are. But I think it was worth it.
Yes, happy holiday to everybody. And we thank you very much to our listeners. This was a big deal. As soon as we announced this to the UFO community that we had the opportunity to interview Uri, everybody jumped in to support us. We want to thank you for that. And we look forward to another show.
Yep, we'll be back. Have a good one. Enjoy the rest of the holiday. Bye-bye.